Hey, I'm Larissa from Beekeeping Made Simple. In this video, I'm going to show you how to extract honey using an extractor. I have been a beekeeper for about 13 years now, and I worked for a commercial apiary where they had gigantic extractors and conveyor belts, and I worked for a small apiary where they just used an electric extractor, and then working for myself, I have used a hand crank extractor. In this video, I'm going to show you how to extract honey using a hand crank 2-frame extractor. Now, extractors are really great inventions. It allows you to spin frames of honeycomb so that the honey comes out. It happens really fast, so you can do lots of frames in a short period of time. And most importantly, you can give the frame of comb back to the bees, what we call wet frames, when they are still wet with honey, but the cells are, for the most part, empty. You can give them back to the bees either immediately or next year when it's springtime and they're bringing in honey and they need somewhere to put it. As always, down below in the description of this video are the timestamps if you want to jump ahead to different parts. This video I made for my online beekeeping class. So if you are finding this video helpful and you like the way it is laid out, I encourage you to check out my online class at beekeepingmadesimple.com, where you will find my full beekeeping class, Beekeeping for Beginners, and it gives you all of the videos of how to keep bees and what goes on in the hive from start to finish. Now, the extractor isn't for everybody. There are people I recommend it for and people I don't. And then there's a great variety in sizes of extractors. So who it's for? It's for people that have at least 3 or more hives, and preferably people that are in their at least 2nd or 3rd year of beekeeping. I do not recommend extractors for people that haven't gotten their bees yet and are just getting into their 1st year, or even are in their 1st year. And the reason why is because, well, there's 2 reasons why. One, extractors are very large, they're expensive, so you don't need this piece of equipment in order to keep bees. So why not hold off buying it until you have your bees and you give it a try doing beekeeping on your own, at your home or wherever you want to keep them, and see how it goes. There's a chance that your bees won't do well in your area. Everyone thinks bees will do great in their yard, but they don't always. And it might just be a real struggle to keep bees, and you might not keep them in the end. Or you just might not like it, or have the time for it, or be physically capable of the physical labor that is involved with beekeeping. So hold off on the extractor for a little bit and give it a go for a year or 2. Also, you might be like me and start out with 1 hive, then the next year you get 2, and then 4 years down the road, you're working your way up to 20-something. You might just catch the beekeeping fever and want to make it your career. And in that case, that 2-frame extractor you bought isn't going to get you very far. And you're going to want to buy a larger one. And you're going to want one that is electric. So know where you're at first and then get the extractor. And also, bee clubs, lots of bee clubs have extractors for their members to use. This was something that wasn't going on for a few years during COVID, but a lot of clubs are now offering this again. And the club I belong to in Philly offered this as a perk of membership. You paid like $10, $15 for the year, and they had extraction days. And that also, if you're a beginner, lets you know when you should be extracting, because if extraction day is August 15th, that means you should have been pulling your honey already. When you're done extracting your honey, if you just really don't know what to do with your frames, then check out the link for my video on how to store drawn out comb so that it doesn't get eaten by rodents and wax moth and cockroaches and all of those fun little critters. What you're going to need is an extractor, and make sure it is assembled according to the manufacturer's directions. We're also going to need your honeycomb, which make sure that it is at least 70% capped, but ideally even more so. You're also going to want some trays. I have here just large baking sheets from a restaurant supply store, but just something that is large enough to put down a frame without it going over the edges. You're also going to want a container to put your frames back into once you're done extracting them. Now that might be the honey super you brought them over with. Just make sure that they're maybe in a trash bag or a bin or something to collect those little bits of honey that are going to be dripping out. You're also going to want your jars or the 5-gallon bucket or whatever container you're putting your honey in after you extract it. You're going to want an uncapping knife. However, I've used them before and I actually prefer just a plain old bread knife. Uncapping knives do vary. You can get ones that are even heated if you like. However, I've never found that to be all that necessary. And then I personally just use a fork, but you can also buy a decapping tool, which kind of looks like a metal pick. And ideally, before you begin using your extractor, you have all of this cleaned, especially the extractor, at least one day, but maybe even a few days in advance, so that it is totally dry. And you want to have a plan for what you're going to do with your frames when you're done. Because if you use the crush and strain method, you pulled out all of the honeycomb, it's all squished, the frames are empty, you can just leave them outside for the bees to clean up if you like. However, with the extractor, your honeycomb is still intact. So if the bees are still gathering honey, you can put it back into the beehive. But if they're done for the season, and say maybe you're even going to be getting ready for winter time coming soon, then you're going to not want to put them back on the beehive, and you can either scrape the honeycomb off of the foundation and melt it down and have it as beeswax, or you can store it to put it back on the beehive next year. Now, if you store it and you live somewhere where it's warm, unless you can keep it in a freezer or refrigerator, it's not going to work. Because wax moth and cockroaches and mice and ants and all these critters like to eat this stuff. And stuff is going to get inside it if it's kept in your basement, in your shed, really almost anywhere. I've tried putting it in heavyweight trash bags, tied up really tight, inside Tupperware containers. These insects get to it. They can really crawl into tiny little crevices. But if you can keep it refrigerated or frozen, or if you live in a place where it's cold enough outside that it's the equivalent of being in a refrigerator or freezer, then they will be safe from insects and rodents eating them. So the first step in the process is to take your frames and to take the capping off of them. What I usually do is I have someone that helps me, and for the first few frames we hold the extractor together because it can be pretty wobbly, and then once the extractor starts to get full of honey, I usually am uncapping and someone else is doing the spinning. You don't want to uncap the frames completely and then have them sitting around waiting to be spun an hour later, or else they will start to drip out quite a bit of honey. Now, a quick word on extractors. This is my favorite extractor. It is only a 2-frame hand crank, and this is great for hobbyists that have, maybe 5 or fewer beehives, and it works really well and it's lasted a really long time. What I love the most about this extractor is that it has a holding tank down below. And so most extractors look like this. They are this upper section. This lower section down below is an addition. Because this extractor has a lower section, it has this to catch any pieces of bees or wax, and a holding tank down below with a gate to pour the honey out. And so this extractor has a hole in the bottom of it, and when you extract, the honey flings out of the cells, goes through the hole, goes through the strainer and into the holding tank. So this does 2 things. One, it adds a lot of weight to this extractor, so it's not as difficult to spin and it's not as wobbly. It's got a lot of weight to secure it and anchor it. The other thing it does is it saves you a ton of time, and that is because when you have a regular extractor without a holding tank below it, the honey then gets flung out of the cells and pulls up on the bottom. So then you have to take the honey and pour it into another bucket with a gate on it, or wherever you're going to be harvesting your honey. And then you need to strain it, and then you need to put it into the containers you're going to be storing it. So instead of having to do that every 2 or 4 frames that you're spinning, you can just have an extractor that has a holding tank below it, and you can just keep on going and going and going, and then when you're done, it's already in the container, it's already strained, and you can pour it out of the gate into wherever it needs to go. So it saves you that one step, but that one step you have to do over and over and over and over and over again, and it's really time consuming. And with the size extractor you want, whether it's a 2-frame, a 4-frame, or larger, is dependent on how many beehives you have and plan on having in the future. If you plan on having 10 or more beehives, you might want to get an electric one. But for a handful of beehives, a hand crank works really well. Now we're going to start harvesting our honey. When uncapping your frame, first you want to take your knife and slice off a very thin capping over top. Having a Tupperware container to be able to put the cappings is always helpful. And when you have frames like this where it's pretty lumpy, it's going to take longer than when they are nice and flat, a little bit smoother. You don't want to dig down too deep. You should still be able to see your knife through that thin layer of the wax capping you're taking off. And then for some of the bumps and other grooves, it's easier to take a fork and to take them. If you are going to be saving your wax cappings because you want to make things out of the beeswax, taking a fork the way I am, sliding it under the capping and then lifting up, you can collect the cappings easily and use them later. If you're in a rush, you can always just go like this, scrape the cappings, and it's a lot faster, but it does destroy more of the comb if you're going to be putting it back in the beehive. And a lot of the cappings get just kind of left behind on the frame, which also then ends up in your extractor. And if you don't have the kind with the holding tank below, it's going to clog up. Now that we uncapped our frames, we can put them in the extractor. You want to make sure that when you're extracting the frames, especially with just a 2-frame extractor, that you use frames that are about the same in weight. Some frames are maybe not as full, so they aren't as heavy, or maybe the honeycomb is a little bit fatter on some frames, and that can make some frames considerably heavy. So the really heavy frames, try to extract at the same time, as well as the really light frames. So there's the basket inside. We're going to take our decapped frames and we're going to put them inside the basket on opposite sides. Once it's full, then you just begin spinning. And of course, if it's electric, then turn it on. You don't have to spin it incredibly fast, but you definitely want to get a good momentum going. And spin it, usually I say count to 60 and see how it goes. A quick word about what you are putting your extractor on. If you have a tall one like this, then you're going to need to put it on a short table. I have it on a couple of bee boxes. You could also put it on some 5-gallon buckets or put it directly on the floor. Just be prepared that it's going to be heavy, and when bottling, you're going to have to lift it up and put it onto a table. If you have a smaller extractor, then you can just put it directly on a table. Since I have it on bee boxes, I just have to always be aware that the fact that this extractor will be moving when it's spinning, and to make sure it doesn't fall off the boxes. So once you've done spinning it, then you are going to take the frames out and you're going to flip them over so that the other side spins. And you're going to spin it again. Once you spin it the second time, you're going to take the frames out and you're going to see how heavy they are. They still feel like they have some weight to them. Spin them some more. You didn't spin them for long enough or maybe fast enough. If they feel really light, then you're done and you can move on to the next set of frames. Now that we're done extracting honey, we can put it into bottles or whatever kind of container you're going to put it in. So first we need to strain it to make sure we get all of those little pieces of wax and bee parts out. Unless you want to keep that in your honey, then you can skip that step. If you have the extractor like we do, where it has the sieve on top, then that part's already done for you. However, if you don't, then all of the honey from the extractor would ideally be poured into a bucket that has a gate like this, and then you get one of these bucket size sieves that can go right on top, and then you pour all of the honey that you extracted over the sieve and it'll go into your bucket. Before you start pouring, one, make sure whatever container you're using, if it has a gate on it, the gate is closed and locked before you put any honey inside. And I like to take a plate and put it on the ground directly below the gate so that any honey that drips that doesn't get in the jar isn't going on the floor. Next, you're going to want to take your jars, if you're putting them into jars, and set them all up right here so that you can grab one jar after the other and you don't have to keep on stopping to grab another jar. You're going to take your jar, put it under the gate, and you're going to turn this so that you can open the gate and lift the gate up. It helps to elevate your honey bucket on boxes so that you don't have to hunch over too much to fill up your jars. Pick up on the gate and push against the rest of the gate so that honey doesn't ooze up on the top. You want to open it just enough to get a good amount of honey pouring out. Once you're getting the hang of things, don't open it up too high and be patient so that you don't overfill your jars. If you don't push up on the gate and you just pick it up, but you don't push it this way towards the bucket, it could get to be a big mess. See, there's lots of honey oozing out on the top of the gate. I have a little bit of a weird experience with extractors. My knowledge of them is really all over the place, but not really what the average hobby beekeeper knows. When I first got started beekeeping, my first few years, I had a top bar hive, and so the crush and strain method was really my only option, and it did not go well, but I've learned to perfect it so that it does go better. If you want to check out that video, that's also my YouTube channel. And then I went to work for a commercial apiary where they had an electric extractor because they had a couple hundred hives. And then I went on to work for another apiary that had 4,000 hives. And so then they had this huge extractor that the original owner custom built, where you put the frames into the box, the super, and the supers were put into the extractor, and the whole thing was spun. I don't even remember how many supers it held, like maybe 10 or so. And they would use a knife to uncap the comb, and then it would be put onto a conveyor belt and sent through a machine where it would like further poke holes into the comb and make sure all of the holes they got, and then it would be put back into the supers and into that extractor. I also worked for a honey packing company, so I've seen the other end of things where they're not really extracting anything, they're just buying stuff and bottling it. And then when I started working for myself, I was still working for the honey packing company. And the owner of that company said that they get a lot of requests for comb honey, but they cannot find anyone to supply them with it. So since I wanted to start building my own apiary and trying to do some beekeeping on my own, I set my hives up for comb honey. And I really just researched as much as I could, and through a lot of trial and error figured out the best way for me to harvest comb honey. And when you do comb honey, you're not using foundation, and if you do not have foundation, it's not great for extractors because the comb usually flops out. You can put wire in your frame, and that allows you to be foundationless, but also give your comb extra support, and you can spin honey when it's cooler out or in an air-conditioned building, and that will help a lot because honeycomb gets really soft when it's warm. But the best thing, the easiest, is to really use plastic sheets of foundation in the center. The beeswax sheets I haven't found really help that much, but the plastic sheets of foundation help a lot. So since I do not use any foundation and I do not use wire, because that would really, it would make the size of the comb I cut out smaller than what I want, I'm using entirely foundationless. And so everything is comb honey, and the little pieces left over are crushed using a crush and strain method. This client that I have buys out all of my honey. I really can't supply them fast enough, so I've stopped extracting using an extractor and selling liquid honey. I took down my website, I stopped selling to retail stores, and I just solely do comb honey. I have one extractor that I use, and it is the one in my extracting video, and it is a 2-frame hand crank extractor, and that is actually an extractor owned by the hotel that I keep bees for, and I only use it for their hives. I've actually never bought an extractor. I do not own one personally. I've used them in a variety of sizes, but I really just don't have a purpose for it. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you find this helpful. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. I can't always get to all of the comments, so if you have a really pressing question, become a member and those questions go to the top of my list, and I'll be happy to answer them as soon as I can.